Reading is one of the most complex things the brain must learn. It's critical that we dig deeper into our running records to mine the reading behaviors that are strong and those that require development to make the best instructional decisions for developing fluent, passionate, critical readers and thinkers. This lesson is designed to highlight for students how appropriate phrasing leads to reading with understanding. Fluency is not a stage of development at which readers can read all words quickly and easily. Fluency changes depending on certain variables: what readers are reading, their familiarity with the words, and the amount of their practice when reading text. Even very skilled readers may read in a slow, labored manner when reading texts with many unfamiliar words or topics. This lesson focuses on one of the 6 dimensions of fluency, phrasing. It's common for teachers to measure reading rate and accuracy, but many neglect to consider how the student parses sentences to bring meaning along. Often, phrasing, or lack thereof, is the leading indicator for the breakdown in understanding. Tim Rosinski's research highlights how fluency impacts comprehension. Fluency is important because it provides a bridge between word recognition and comprehension. Because fluent readers don't have to concentrate on decoding the words, they can focus their attention on what the text means, make connections among the ideas in the text, and draw from background knowledge. The lesson objective for this session is to understand the role appropriate phrasing, or chunking text into meaningful phrases, plays in the ability to understand what is read. This lesson is 45 to 50 minutes and can be used for whole group or small groups with minimal modification. This lesson assumes students have experience in partnerships, thinking routines such as turn and talk and think, pair, share, and that there has been some introduction to punctuation marks and their purpose. It's helpful, but not essential for students to have experience with using rubrics. This is a perfect opportunity to weave student rubrics into your instruction for the first time. Materials needed for this lesson include 2 copies of a familiar reading passage. These can be typed, or you can use 2 copies of the same book. 1 copy will be for your modeling, and the second will be used for the active engagement segment of the lesson. A second grade model is included in the lesson plan as an example of how you might choose to mark up a text. A fluency rubric of your choice should be selected. You'll find 2 possible options linked on the lesson plan. One is from MLPP, and the second is Fountas and Pinnell's 6 Dimensions of Fluency rubric. The third item needed is a student-friendly version of the fluency rubric of your choice. One possible option is included in the lesson plan. You may choose to use it as is, or you might use it just as a sample and create your own. Ask yourself, what tool will match my students best to help them set personalized reading goals and track their fluency growth over time? The explicit instruction sequence is critical. Students need to understand how today's lesson fits with yesterday's learning. Research tells us there's a greater impact in the learning when students have an understanding of what it is they need to know and be able to do. Be sure students understand why this lesson lives in your classroom today. Phrasing is the way readers put words together in groups to represent meaningful units of language. When we begin to read, we learn how letters represent sounds and how letters and sounds are put together to make words. Then, we learn how words work together to create units, or phrases and sentences that have meaning. If we read words separately, especially if we read those words slowly, we lose meaning. Here are some statements you might use for the explicit instruction segment. Teacher modeling is an important element in the gradual release process. Remember, all students, but especially the most developing readers, need to have good models in front of them at all times. Select a text that's familiar to the students, or type up a short passage from a familiar text for the modeling segment. Make sure all students can see and hear your modeling. Remember, modeling for students makes our words visible and our actions the exact model we're seeking to notice in our students' reading. Begin by introducing the rubric you've selected. Simply walk through the rubric with students first. Then, move into the modeling. Begin reading the first text aloud, word by word. Point to each word as you read it at a slow pace. Think aloud while you score yourself on the rubric. Then, share what you think you can do better. Reread the same passage again. This time, read with appropriate phrasing and with pace close to talking rate. Make your reading exemplary. This reinforces that we improve when we reread. Then, score yourself again, thinking aloud with the rubric. Ask students what they noticed about the two readings. As students respond to the grouping of words in units, use highlight tape or the highlighter to pinpoint the student responses as they share their observations. Then, when you're finished, reread the passage to reinforce the appropriate phrasing decisions the students determined. The active engagement segment is an important element in the gradual release process. Remember that all students, especially our most developing readers, need time to process thinking. This is the time for you to allow students the opportunity to walk through the process you just modeled with guidance before going off to work independently. When we read anything the first time, especially text that's complex, we're not able to do our best reading. We want students to understand that practice improves our fluency. Now read the second passage with exemplary phrasing. After each sentence, have the class choral read to match your accurate and appropriate phrasing. Then allow students to score the reading together. Reinforce the fact that the reading became more fluent because of the practice and rereading. Link and launch into practice is a brief reminder of the learning objective. This is the time to reiterate the purpose for the practice time. The practice for this lesson can be done in partnerships or independently. You decide what your students need. Here's one way you might link and launch into practice. Practice is the time for you to check in with your students. Notice what they're doing well and what support they might need to improve their phrasing. By moving around the room to confer with individual students or small groups, you can collect evidence to share at the end of the lesson. This is the time for you to record notes on how students are growing their phrasing skills and make note of what instruction should come next. Modifications can be made based upon the amount of time left in this lesson for a powerful share time. Some options to consider might be move into a quick share to highlight the moves of a student you conferred with. You could have students share a page from their reading with their partner and explain their reading moves, and the partner could use the rubric to give feedback to the reader. Or invite a student to share how they improved their phrasing today. Here's a sample statement that might be used to end the lesson. Having a formative assessment process in place helps you determine what your students need next. Here are some suggestions for collecting evidence of student learning for this lesson to determine next step instruction. Within the lesson plan, you'll find helpful links to recommended resources for additional routines, small group instruction suggestions, and some articles and book recommendations to deepen your understanding of fluency and the research-based methods for developing confident, passionate, and fluent readers. Also in the lesson plan, you'll find suggested student resources that offer reading passages for practice and suggested methods for students to track their fluency growth over time. Here are the standards that are addressed and assessed in this lesson.